Well, hi, my name is Lloyd Tosser, and this is the 31st of August. I'm at the Midwest Skydiving Reunion. Wish you could be here. And I get an opportunity to just talk to you a little bit about my skydiving career history. I don't know what you want to call it, but I will say this at the beginning. Best thing I ever did was jump out of an airplane. And it has definitely changed. It changed the direction of my life in so many different ways. And for me, my first jump was in 1971, and I was selling clothes at a store, and one of the guys that worked there would come in on Monday mornings all excited, and I could not understand, why he was so excited on Monday morning. And I asked him, he said that he was jumping out of airplanes on the weekend. And of course I couldn't believe this. I had never really known anyone that had jumped out of an airplane, and he said that I should do it, and if I would, he'd pay for my first jump. And so that weekend, off we went to Mooresville, Indiana, Parachutes and Associates, a drop zone very similar to this one. It had a grass strip and a lot of people, that were jumping out of the airplanes. And so back in those days, it was static line, and I received a great training program, 3 hours ground training, and then up we went that afternoon. And I'll never forget. I will admit that first jump, standing on the strut, everything was kind of mixed up, the sounds and the sights. But when I left the step and ended up sitting under that round canopy, and it was round back in those days, they were round, it was so quiet and so peaceful. And you had the time to look around and see the sights. And I fell in love with it then. My fourth jump was my first malfunction, and I had a Mae West caused from, of course I was blaming everybody but me, but in reality it was bad body position as I left the plane, and I had a Mae West, and was definitely bothered by it, Mae West. So I followed my training. I whipped out the reserve and had 2 canopies, pulled the bad one in, and landed. And at that point, I was wondering, if this is really something I wanted to do. But that night, they were showing a film called Masters of the Sky, and I'll never forget it. I fell in love with that film. I asked them if I could borrow it. I took it home, showed my family, every member of my family, the fraternity that I belonged to back at college. And I still to this day, I think I have every part of that memorized. Well, I came back the next day and started jumping, and that was it. And from that point on, it was at a time in the sport where it was still had been predominantly style and accuracy, and even though I admired that, there was something called relative work that they were talking about, where you could actually fly in the sky with another person and have a contact, and that really intrigued me. And so that's the direction I went, and I became a student of the sport, and I moved out to California with the person who got me started. And I moved out there to learn, because that's where all the sky gods were. Now, back then you could say sky god and it wasn't a bad thing. It meant somebody that was really good in the sport. Now it's not looked at it that way, not quite the same. But I went out there to learn, and I moved to San Diego, got a job selling clothes. That's what I was doing back in those days. And I went to Otay Lakes, and I was jumping a square canopy back when I had a cloud, not the baby cloud, the big one, and on the risers it said caution, high performance canopy, and I could not get a lot of the jumpers to jump with me out in California. And so I made several jumps just by myself, people looking at me, they would stare at my risers and the plane. And I had a guy come up to me and say, I'll jump with you. And he told me what we wanted to do, and it was a little intimidating because it was a lot. And we made this jump, did a lot of different things. And when it came time for separation, I shook at about 2,500 feet. Yeah, we opened at 2,500 feet back in those days. And he wouldn't let go. And about 2,000 feet, I shook again, and he's grinning at me. Well, at that point, I could have ripped his arms off. Anyway, so, we broke and we landed, and I was upset, and I was going to give him my word, but I found out that he was a part of the SEAL team. And so I'm glad I didn't say anything. But at that point, everybody started to, they figured I was okay to jump with. And my next jump was with some of the members of the Wild Bunch. And I got a chance to follow. It was kind of a combination Wild Bunch and a few of the other guys. And I still have all their names and their numbers, and they were low numbers. And I got to fly in 8th. And so I got my SCR and my SCS on the same jump out in California. And so as soon as I got that, I stayed long enough to go up and to say I jumped in Elsinore. I jumped up there, and I came straight back to Indiana, because back then the only thing that was happening was the James gang up in the Hinckley area. They had put together, well, before them the family had put together an 8-man. But the James gang, was really the team that was competing with the West Coast teams, and down in Florida, the team, it was always California, Florida, and then here in the Midwest. And because we fought the seasons, and they didn't, I feel like, maybe not as much was expected from the Midwest as far as innovation and experience. But at any point, I came back and I received word that the Godfrogs were having a tryout. And I thought, oh my gosh, the Godfrogs, because this is all part of, I just wanted to learn. And so I tried out for the Godfrogs and I made it. And that was one of the, probably outside of, well, the biggest day of my sport was getting my SCR and SCS. That was by far the biggest day of my in the sport. But getting on the Godfrogs, because after the James gang, it was the Godfrogs, and Pat Works had just moved out to California. I just missed jumping with Pat by a year. And but I learned from some of the very best, and I was, like I said, I was a student. I mean, I would be the first one there, and I'd be the last one to leave. And if I heard them talking, these guys, I was always like lurking around, trying to hear the conversations, and I learned a lot.